We're going to start. It's 3. First of all, I want to say thanks for coming. I know there's like 11 sessions that you had to choose from. And my only hope is you walk away with one good thing from this session, feel like it was worth your time. That's my goal. And there might be an esoteric random thing that you just didn't expect to see. I'm going to start. This is about schema.org blueprints, and specifically it's about mixing the schema.org blueprints module into a Drupal recipe to bake a sweet content model. My name is Jake Rockowitz. I want to make your life easier by solving complex problems with simple, well-thought-out solutions. You can find me at J Rockowitz on the web. And I've learned at DrupalCon it's worth just pausing and saying what's happening in Drupal to level set, and then to proceed with what I'm going to show you. And just to say, this presentation is about recipes, which is a concept and an API, and it's being used to build Drupal CMS, a product and a collaboration. And I'm saying Experience Builder is TBD because it's not released yet, and frankly, from the schema.org perspective that I'm coming from, I don't know how that will work with Experience Builder. And then in the community, we're just much more ambitious. We're taking on some difficult challenges. There's some momentum. Things are moving faster. And our tools and approach is improving and evolving. And this presentation, just to repeat, it's about a Drupal, like building a recipe using the schema.org blueprints module with a little sprinkle of Drupal CMS at the end. And I got to just start with schema.org and bring everyone up to speed that it is a collaborative community activity with a mission to create, maintain, and promote schemas for structured data on the internet, on web pages, and email messages, and beyond. It's a collaboration between Google, Microsoft, and Yahoo, and many others to just define data. And this is the best example I could come up with, which is my information in JSON LD, which is that's schema.org. Underneath a page, we might put this information on my profile on Drupal.org. I do want to call out something about the properties given name, additional name, and family name. That's not first name, middle name, and last name because we're trying to have an international standard here. Standard naming conventions for properties. And you'll see, I'm going to call it out every once in a while where these things are really well thought out in a collaborative effort. And standards can change industries in the world. I personally I live in New York, so I love the containerization of ships and this concept that when we built these containers, it changed the world. It built our modern society. And we have standards on the internet. We have HTTP, HTML, JavaScript, WebCAG, RSS, and now schema.org. And schema.org has been around for 20 years, but I'm really emphasizing that it's the most important standard. And I realize this slide to me is the most important way to say it. Look, HTTP is for transferring information. HTML is for rendering information. JavaScript is for interacting with information. WebCAG is to make information accessible, and RSS is for syndicating information. And schema.org is for defining that information. And it's so important right now when we think about AI, and computers need to understand our web page. They might be able to scrape it, but they're going to miss something. Unless you have schema markup underneath where they completely understand your event dates, when they're happening, what is the exact key piece of information you're trying to highlight on a page. And to bring it back to Drupal, you can build anything in Drupal, and schema.org provides a standard for defining anything. And the Blueprints module is taking a schema.org first approach, which leverages schema.org as the foundation for building content models using structured data, which is API first, standardized, and universal. We are no longer complying with the standard, we're leveraging it. In our community, we do have a meta tag schema.org module, which you build your own content architecture and then you try to just map it to schema.org. And it doesn't always work. And frankly, you built your own content model and reinvented a wheel that was already built, which is schema.org. And the Blueprints module takes that schema.org first approach and brings it into Drupal to build our content models and structured data. And about the module, I kept it really simple. It is solving a very complex problem, how to take this spec and bring it into Drupal. It is definitely a work in progress, and I can explain that more at the end. And people have started using this term Drupal adjacent. I definitely feel this project is Drupal adjacent. It is never going to get into core and might not make it, probably will never make it into Drupal CMS. It's off to the side. And I just want to point out that's kind of okay in the community. We're going to have some contrib modules that align with Drupal CMS and are part of that golden package or standard. And then we're going to have ideas and thoughts that are sitting off to the side, adjacent to what's happening in the community. I almost think we should embrace that this is going to happen. And to go through the history of the module, I show this slide. There are a gazillion submodules to this module. It's I've done this presentation a million times, and I keep this slide in because it overwhelms people. when you look at the groupings here, it starts to make sense why I'm breaking things down into smaller things that are easier to test and understand. So in the upper left, in the core, it's the schema.org core module, the UI, the help, and reporting. In the bottom left, it's the mapping of entity types in Drupal core. And Drupal core has these modules, and we're saying we're going to extend those to make them work with schema. In the middle, in the top section, I'm calling out contrib modules that are part of Drupal CMS. So I am really trying to align the schema.org blueprints module with common recommended modules in our community. And to the right, I kind of want to emphasize that JSON LD doesn't work out of the box. There's modules that you have to turn on and enable, because that's just a spec that's on top of schema.org. Some sites, if they're not public, they don't need JSON LD. It actually doesn't make sense. But still, for an internal site, you want to have a good content model. And this document I created, the Decisions MD, records the functional and non-functional technical decisions behind the schema.org blueprints module. I have a blog post about it. I'm linking to the direct file. And actually, I want to hop over and just kind of open with saying, you know, the project page has a lot of documentation, and all the decisions are over here. And they were inspired by architectural decision records. It's definitely for teams that need to make decisions and record them. You should look up that spec. And this is a little variant of that, because I'm not making every decision its own page. I am just listing out every decision I've made in the module with the hope that a developer coming in can, in a half hour or maybe 20 minutes, read this document and understand the logic behind it. And the examples, I can even make it bigger for myself so I can see it. You know, I'm basically saying, what's the namespacing? Use loosely coupled submodules that do one thing over monolithic modules that do many things. And then I get into how we're mapping Drupal's entity types to schema.org. You know, user goes to person, media goes to media object. A node is really anything. And then at the bottom, and by the way, this document is really helpful for my team. At the very bottom, I want to call this out. I'm recording every module that I'm possibly recommending. I put the little star next to it. That means there's a little code doing an integration. But I'm giving some, so a developer can come in and look at this list and be like, okay, they have the address module because schema.org needs to capture an address. And we're using Smart Date because we want to do scheduling. And we're using, and sometimes I'm including UI modules in here that I just think are important. I even list out my CK editor recommendations. Going back into the presentation, there were a lot of ways to show you the module, and I decided to just talk about the evolution of the workflows for using the schema.org blueprints module. I've been working on it for over 2 to 3 years, and it started out as you go in and you add a single schema.org type using the user interface. And then that evolved into, well, you really need more than one schema.org type to build a content architecture, so I implemented mapping sets, which is multiple schema.org types. And then I realized you need to config and adjust those schema types as they're created and have a little code. So I started creating a concept called starter kits. And starter kits really became recipes. That's what lots of people were doing, starter kits. And frankly, I wrote the starter kit like 3 months before the recipes initiative was announced. And now I'm gradually moving starter kits over to recipes. And finally, recipes, which is just config actions. And now we're going to just get into some demos. And the demo is based off a sandbox, and it just helps. Let me get a sip of water. We're going to see a lot of things in action, so I want to pause. And so we're going to start with the mapping UI, an easy way to create schema.org based entity type or bundle using the Drupal admin UI. And, I got to get my directions right. What I have here is a sandbox module for schema.org recipes. It has all the code you're going to see here. I had the barcode. I'll show you the QR code at the end so you can grab all the slides and all this information. And what this is a little markdown file in this recipes. It's a demo. And I'm going to go through it step by step. If anyone's using PHP Storm, I'm going to use this great feature where you can write little bash snippets and hit play. So I don't have to type commands. It kind of saves my butt. This is starting off on how to install this sandbox. But more importantly, what I'm going to do is set up a nice clean installation of Drupal. I'm using DDEV and OrbStack. I got to shout out OrbStack for performance. I literally gained 25% performance in my local dev environment from it. So I've just set up a schema.org blueprints demo. You're going to have to trust me for another minute. I'm going to just install a few modules, Core's navigation module, media library, and devel generate, just to make things a little easier. And this step I don't have to do because I ran it, but it does show you a nuance of recipes. So right now, all your recipes need to be in the same directory. It is a little tricky, and there's some debate, and I'm linking to that debate. I need some core recipes to set up the blueprints module, to set up media types and workflows. So I'm symlinking them right here next to my other recipes, and then that makes the process work without a problem. And now I'm going to apply a recipe. I'm applying the JSON LD recipe because everyone wants to see that. I'm going to break that down after it applies. Down below, 77 modules are being installed and configured. It's figuring out all the dependencies of the recipes and how I can show that to you. The JSON LD is just saying enable these modules, but then go up before you do it and enable the base recipe. And when I go to the base recipe, it's really stupid. It's just saying enable the core and contrib recipes. And frankly, I'm using a sandbox because I don't know if this is totally right. I think this makes a lot of sense to explain things to people, but if you look at core, they break things down into very small individual recipes for each piece of functionality. So I'm not totally sure what the right evolution is. But when we go to the core recipe, you're going to get some examples that I need some of those core media types and the editorial workflow, and then these core modules with my schema.org extensions on it, and then I'm just really nudging some config forward. And there's this little execute install hook that I had to create to make sure my schema.org install hooks get executed correctly. Going back to contrib, same thing. I'm just a couple of contrib modules. Then I'm adding the extensions to those and pushing some extra config in. If I go back to the demo, and I must not skip this step, I'm going to make a backup because then I can come back to it. Now we're at what I want to demo. It took a second, but not that long to literally start from 0 to get to this point. I'm going to open up the demo site. So we have a clean demo. The best place to get started, what everyone wants to do, is see it in action. So you can go over, I'm going to make this a little bigger, to structure, content types, and we get this add schema.org type. And I'm going to click on it, and it gives you this start page. This is actually pretty much copied from schema.org, like with recommendations, how you want to build different sectors. And this is completely customizable. But I like using an event. Everyone has events on their sites. And what this is doing is just giving you an event content type. So this is the content type, the add content type form, just in a details element. It figures out the name is event, the machine name is lowercase event. And these are add-on modules that are enhancing even the creation of the event. So schema.org has a hierarchical architecture of types. So you can have an event, but then below it, you have more specificity of those events to say that they're a business event, a children's event. Conference is not listed here, but the reality is that schema.org supports an additional type property that can be added to any schema to add another level of specificity. So you could pick any string. The recommendation is to pick something that aligns with wiki data. So you say conference, and machines can figure that out. I'm going to let this go through, and it's going to allow subtype. This is also like a subtyping pattern. I'm going to close it to save a little space. I have JSON LD enabled. This just allows you to add a little extra JSON LD to your markup. Maybe you want to add a copyright or some special piece of information to every event. And this is really the heart of it. It's mapping schema.org types to fields. When it's green, that means it's found in an existing field that makes sense. So the description of the event can be the body field. The in language is just line code. Once again, I want to call out, they thought out naming conventions. In language is such a more appropriate name to say what the document's language is. It's in this language, not line code. And the name is the title, and that makes sense too. I've always been troubled by we call everything title in Drupal. And what's yellow is going to be created. It's an event schedule, and it's using smart dates range element, and we can even click on this. And this is a dialog that's pulling in the schema.org report module to explain what an event schedule is. And frankly, it's a way they originally started the spec with just start and end date to an event. That doesn't really work for some events because they're repeating or they have different dates. So they have a schedule property that you can pick add multiple dates, and the smart date module is amazing at creating that series of events. So, and finally at the bottom, and by the way, these are all lessons learned as I was building out the module. Originally, it was just creating a page with the event schema on it. It's actually not correct, because what it is you have a web page that happens to have an event on it. So you want to have an additional mapping that's wrapping the event. And so the additional mapping module says, well, frankly, every schema I build is wrapped in a web page. Sometimes if you do a person, you'd wrap it in a profile page, which is a subtype of web page. And the first 4 properties make perfect sense. I'm just saying when the page was created, modified, the language and the name. And they have a nice spec, primary image of the page. That's as literal as it gets. It means that's the primary image. And then they have related link and significant link. And I like calling this out as another example where the collaboration between the contributors schema, they thought things out. So if I have an event, I like doing a blog post. If I have a blog post about a doctor doing the latest cancer research, a significant link would be to that doctor's bio. A related link would be to other articles about cancer research. And it's good to have that level of specificity in your properties because I would never customize a significant link. Meanwhile, I feel like related links are perfect for personalization, where you would track them, adjust them, and tweak them. I'm going to go hit save. And it's just created an event content type. I can go over to create. A shout out to the type tray module. I'm using the type tray module. There's a sub-module for that in the schema.org blueprints module. And frankly, what it does is it adds icons. And I think that's pretty cool. It's really funny. I mean, I even contributed this patch, and this is a little bug you're seeing down below, but I contributed a patch where I'm going to go create a business event, and it takes the icon that's in that start page and brings it over to the node edit form. It makes sense. Now, we've got a pristine node edit form with field groups. There's a field group module, submodule, to group these elements and decide what the weights are. You have full control over these decisions. You get title, description, image to media, our event schedule and an event group, and then you have your links down below. Other enhancements that are happening is I have a default workflow on the site, so it's adding that default workflow to every content type as it's being created. And the same thing is being applied to the simple sitemap widget. It's just getting added to every content type. You can decide to turn this on and off. It's kind of a best practice is to have a pattern that goes through the whole site. What is missing here is I created a single content type, and there's no reference to people. And people go to events, people attend events, people speak at events, people organize events. And you start to realize, well, I've got to create a person, and then I got to create a relationship. And that leads to the next evolution of the workflow. When I built this, I was like, oh, it's getting really tiring to keep clicking through and creating each one by one. So going back, I added something called mapping sets, and they provide a quick and easy way to set up and test different related schema.org types. And to demo that, I'm going to keep going on my little list here. I'm turning on a module called the schema.org mapping set module, and it's just going to pop open the UI. And I left this error deliberately because we all have an opinion about paragraphs. And I have an opinion that in certain cases with schema.org, it is absolutely the right use case for it. And down here below, I'll use the restaurant. Let me see. The food establishment. So these are little sequences to create content types. And if a food establishment, a restaurant, if you were building a restaurant site, you want to have the restaurant page, you want to maybe throw a recipe in there, you'd want to publish a menu. And a menu is broken down into sections and menu items. Paragraphs are perfect for that. It's a good UI, it tracks revisions, you have your unit, if you delete your menu, it deletes all the paragraphs. It's absolutely perfect for it. It's not necessary for my demo, so I decided to make it a good example of you have a lot of flexibility to decide how you want to go about doing this. I like calling out podcasts in this because if you wanted to create a podcast series, you're going to want to create really 2 or 3 content types. You definitely want a podcast episode, and you have to decide, do you have a podcast series or do you have seasons? So if you're yearly doing podcasts every year you could create all 3. And you can get a preview in here of what's going to be created. So you get a preview of, well, I'm going to create a podcast with actors. If I had persons on the site, it would map to person. You can go a little further with it. This is just suggestions, and then if I go down to the podcast season, it does start to figure out that you're going to want episodes, and it's going to be a relationship. And actually that gets, as the types get built, it starts to map out its relationships because it figures out, well, instead of a string, it's going to go, there's a podcast episode content type. I should link episodes to podcast episodes using an entity reference. This is a very, very, very basic, simple approach, and it helps to show the config to show how simple it is. This is YAML. All the configuration is YAML. It's not that complex, but you have to, I did my best to show some examples of what you might want to enter. And the pattern here is you're saying, I have a group of required schema.org types. Here's the label, and here's the types. And the pattern that's been established is you're going to specify your entity type, schema type. If you want to name your bundle, you can interject a bundle in there and say your entity type, bundle, schema type. And this just creates a little list that it runs through. But what you're getting here is all the out-of-the-box settings happening. That's it. You're basically, and this is the only time I'm going to show settings, and there's a lot of them before I show you anything, because I don't want to overwhelm people. You get whatever's here is what's going to happen. You can't massage it or specify requirements. One way to do this is you go into the settings and adjust them. But sometimes you want to kind of have all your opinions in one place. Frankly, that's what a recipe is. It's a bunch of opinions in a YAML file. The best example here, this little snippet section shows you the power of schema. It understands hierarchical content types. So an article is the primary, and then, so an article is always going to have an article body, headline, and image. And if I do a news article, it's going to inherit article, it's going to have those three properties, and add a date line to it. And it goes further and further down, and you can adjust that hierarchy. Every single add-on module gets its own details element. I called out additional types, so this is saying we have these additional types. When I go into these additional types, it will automatically turn them on. It'll say, you probably want to do, for a medical organization, you might want to do some subtyping. There is a lot of documentation. This just gives me a good opportunity to show you there's a help module. Every module has its own. This is the README MD file in the Drupal UI, enhanced. And then if you go up to the main file, you get an overview, frankly, of every single submodule that you could or couldn't install with some recommendations. And one of the reasons I did this is some modules you need for production. If you're doing just JSON-LD, you need some modules turned on for production. But if you're just generating, like the mapping set module is not recommended for production because it's meant for a local developer to generate some types and export that config. Okay. So mapping sets were limited. It's just a sequence. And it evolved to starter kits. A starter kit's a set of schema.org types with additional configuration and code that sets up and configures an entire working solution. So it's a module. And to demo that, I'm going to turn on the starter kit module. And it's actually going to open the organization starter kit because I felt like this starter kit, it's fairly simple and doesn't have, in the starter kits I was building, I was using config rewrite, very similar to config actions where you can massage config in Drupal as the module is being installed. But in this starter kit, everything here is boilerplate code, the same in every single starter kit except this single file here, where you're seeing the pattern, I'm defining the types I want this starter kit to create, but I'm giving a nudge to the properties that I absolutely want created. I need relationships. So I'm saying create member of, create a contact point, create I want suborganization and parent organization, member and contact point for organization. I also, when I'm creating job postings, I want to make sure the hiring organization of a job posting will do an entity reference to an organization. So we go back to the UI, and I just happen to have every single starter kit I've ever created, so if people see something and want to ask questions, I can come back to them. But I like using organization. It is fairly simple, and I can go to install starter kit, and I'm going to hit confirm, and it's going to scaffold out all three content types with a few dozen fields in a split second. This messaging is, I might take it out at some point, but I was so proud of this feature I wanted to keep it in. It's setting up inverse of relationships. It's basically saying, well, for organization, suborganization should reference parent organization, and parent organization should reference suborganization. And this is really powerful. I'm not shouting out all the modules in the list, but this is the corresponding entity reference module. And down below, if I come back, it's going to be green because it's installed. It's a module, so I can track that, which is nice. And because early on I installed Devel Generate, I can click Generate, and what it's going to do is generate some sample content that we can talk about. So now I go over to the content section, and since we're really talking about organizations, I'll pull up an organization. And by the way, this is the first time I'm giving you real content in here, so it's important. This little widget is using the entity pre-populate module. It's understanding the relationships and, oh boy, man, thank you, looking out. I'm not going to go through how that, by the way, that's why I use Devel Generate. You can add to this organization a sub-organization, a job posting, a person as a member or employee, build out these relationships. And these are concrete named relationships. They're not arbitrary. They're not parent-child. They're concrete, they're understandable. And it fills it out. In the bottom, I have some examples, right? It's showing you links to relationships. I got really inspired by the content model documentation module, where they started doing charts of your entity reference relationship diagrams. And they were using this library called Mermaid.js. I'm going to get to it in a half a second because I'm on this, and I just want to say, these tabs get turned on to just show you the raw data. So a non-technical person can look at the data that's going out to JSON LD. A developer can look at the JSON LD data. And I want to emphasize, this is the whole point of that additional mappings. We're on a web page. The main entity on the web page is an organization. I don't do demos of layout and component building, but conceptually, you have a web page with multiple components that every single CTA can be mapped to schema.org. But for the organization, I added a diagrams module, and it shows you an org chart. Now, this is a relationship to subject of and about, and the concept, and Devel Generate doesn't do a good job. You're writing a blog post, and what is it about? It's about an organization, so you can create a concrete reference back to the organization. And the organization can have on its page, it's a subject of this blog post. But we get a nice org chart. The extra lines are just Devel Generate getting a little too happy with relationships. Really, if you use it right, you're basically getting a pristine org chart of your entire organization. And then members. This is a good one to stay on for a second to say. So an organization can have a member, so there's a person down below, but this gray box is a role. So Schema figured out you can't just say, well, this person is a member of that organization. You need to say this person is the president of that organization, but they're the chairman on this organization. And you can add a role in the spec. And in our community, we have a module called the Entity Reference Override module. And the simple concept of that, and for any developer, it's the same table you look at where it has, the target ID and a value column. So you can add a little extra value to any entity reference. And a shout out to that module, that value can be used for anything you want. You could override a label, you can add a description. In this case, we're using it to define the relationship further using a role. And I really love this Mermaid.js. So it gives me an opportunity to hop into the reporting system. So we're in the schema.org report module, and what it does is it just shows you all the schema.org types. It just brings that spec into Drupal, and where you can just scan it, go through it. If you want to create an about page, you can go here, read it, and then add it even from this UI. To go back to relationships, this is the org chart that the starter kit created, and I hope I can see. Okay, we're going to do the best we can. It shows you all the relationships, and this has been huge. I'm working on a content model of 32 different content types, and you're able to zoom in and figure out how things are working, and you can filter and say, what are the links to an organization? And this is a much easier content diagram to look at, where it says an organization, a job posting can be related to an organization through the hiring organization. Organization could be related to other organizations through the parent and sub. And then you get to people, have member of and member of role. That's, when I say member of, it's an inverse of relationship. So organizations have members, and a person can be a member of. You can even download the SVG into your documentation system. Okay, going back. So recipes. I want to say that what I just showed you in the organization starter kit is identical in recipes. So I'm going to walk through the recipe UI and say this is all up in the air. But we know a recipe is a tool for site builders and developers to add functionality to a Drupal site. And the demo is a lot simpler for a recipe. First off, I'm going to restore my backup because I don't want to have overlapping schema.org types and get a muddled diagram. And now I'm going to enable the schema.org recipe module. It is totally optional. It is absolutely experimental. It might die a slow and painful death at some point. It's very similar to what you saw in mapping sets. It wasn't hard for me to create this module because I had the underlying APIs to say, well, let's list out all the recipes on the site, show the dependencies in a little sidebar, and we can go back into our organization thing. It lists it out. And frankly, for me, it was a tool to debug things, to look at, this is the same starter kit in a recipe. So I'm saying these are the modules. By the way, it does show you, like, I gave you a demo of the organization starter kit module, but you didn't see the dependencies because I was showing you the YAML file. It's kind of nice that this recipe is showing you everything that's possibly happening to create this organization chart. And so these are the menus that need to be installed. I'm executing a few install hooks. That's a little nuance, but then you get the same thing that was in that YAML file where I'm just saying create a schema.org mapping for a node person. That's literally the config file that's going to be generated. And here are the properties that I want absolutely required. Now, just the true and false values are just kind of saying I want these properties must be on the content type. If you set it to false, it means I don't really want them. It won't create those properties. If there's other configurations sitting around, like if you have the content type existing, it'll just merge it. It'll just say, okay, well, they have an organization, but we need to add sub-organization and parent organization. And that stuff I'm gradually working out. But you get the idea, and I have this apply recipe where I'm literally just calling the command line tool. This probably will go away when the Drupal update initiative gets recipes being applied in the UI. So I had to think a little bit about, like, what's the best recipe I could show you and make a point. And I decided to go back to, well, first off, I want to talk about switching to the schema.org blueprints module to get to this recipe that I created. One, you could apply schema.org to existing content types. You can have a site, you can go into the UI for that, go to add the fields tab, and there's a schema.org tab, and you can map your one-to-one your fields. Or you can create new schema.org content types on your site and do an in-place migration. I mean, I'll throw it out there. If you have an event content type that's not working, you could create a schema_event content type, just prefix the machine name, and then migrate your data over and have a lot cleaner event system. Or hopefully people are coming into Drupal and you start from scratch. You have an external application and use the migrate API to migrate that into Drupal. What I'm doing is I have a Drupal 8 site that was launched in beta versions of Drupal, started with alpha, and had a ton of technical debt. And the biggest technical debt was the content model, because it went back almost 15 years. So it was a content model that just kept moving forward as we upgraded systems. And we want to fix it, and we want to start over. So we're doing a Drupal to Drupal migration. And I can't show that to you. Why? Because it's my company's project. And it's also an overwhelming thing to demo. But even for myself, to figure out how to do this kind of pattern where you're taking an architecture that you're not happy with, and I'm sorry to use terms like that with Drupal CMS, and move it to a schema.org compliant architecture, I realized that Drupal CMS provided me that opportunity. It has a lot of content types, and it actually will start with saying Drupal CMS combines smart defaults to get you quickly started with unlimited customizations to handle complex requirements. It definitely is great for getting you started. The question I have is, where do you go from there, especially with the content model? And before I even start complaining about the content model or just calling out some nuances and challenges, there's an initiative. It launched with initial content strategy. There's a team that consulted schema.org to inform and validate some assumptions, and it will be expanded in an iterative manner. And they will gather some feedback and adjust the content model accordingly. But it's tricky to adjust content models once people start using them. And I created this to kind of do a comparison of Drupal CMS to what you would use in schema.org. So Drupal CMS is using tags on the blog post, and schema.org is like, they really should be keywords. If you read the spec for keywords, it says put your tags here. And if you think about it, what's going to happen in Drupal CMS is you're going to turn on the meta tag module, and it's going to have a keywords field that you're going to map your tags to. So hence, the point is schema probably is the right way to go because keywords is more universal. And then with, they did featured image, and schema.org was, I would love to have been a fly on the wall when they said, we need to call it primary image of the page. It is the most literal property I've seen in the spec, but it kind of makes sense. It just because you hit that, if you ever try to put all those meta tags to get your images to appear on Twitter, Facebook, and all this, it's ridiculous. And they wanted something that's just canonical. And The biggest one I had a challenge with was they have case studies. On a case study, you can say, I have a client, and you can link to your client. And they actually have this pattern in 2 different content types. So a case study can have a client, and a project can have a client as fields directly on. I'll show it in the UI. But in reality, what you want to do is create a project that is about a client, and then you want to use the same as field to reference their website. Same as is this idea that you're on a page, and those are URLs to the similar information. For people, we use it for social media. So on my bio, it should say, here's my Twitter feed, here's my Facebook, here's my Drupal account. And I'm going to do a demo. And I'm going to open up Drupal CMS, and I hope people have installed it. It is not hard to get set up, and this version has just got all the content types set up, and I'm going to call out some of the challenges that I see. I'm going to start with people. And this is very clean, but when you get to the node edit form, you don't have a first and last name field. This one 100% threw me for a loop to have 4 email and phone numbers that have no attributes to describe what they are for. You'd want to know if it's home or work. And then we have the tags at the bottom, and then I want to call out the client challenge, which, go to case study. It's a case study. We're calling out Drupal CMS. You hit edit, and at the very bottom, they've got their client link. It's a little tricky there. And if we go back, I'll call out one more that I'm going to come to. If we have an event, DrupalCon Atlanta, we have our event, and then how are they doing this? Oh, they're using the address module, but they don't have a map. And once again, they're linking to the website. Okay. So, going back. I'll make sure my sequence is good here. Okay. So I created a Drupal CMS to schema.org CMS sandbox. I'll never publish this for real. I just will not. And you can get this code, and frankly, it's like my little play box to just experiment with. And you know what I want to show you? So I feel like I have an extra second here. There we go. We're in our recipes. We go up. I go into the CMS recipe. I'm not executing. So you see I'm starting to mirror the content types. There's an event, place, web page, blog post. At the very bottom, I show the configuration, which is kind of nice and clean. I'm adding a little geolocation. By the way, Drupal CMS is not using geolocation. I think it's using geofield, and that's an interesting debate because both modules have equal amount of a lot of users. I went with geolocation because it was simpler, and I felt like it just does longitude and latitude mostly. But I'm making little adjustments, coming back to that additional mapping. I'm literally changing the configuration, adding keywords. That's the one thing I'm doing to a web page, so that every page can have a keyword on the site, tags on the site. And I'm doing some updates to Path Auto, where I'm just saying, hey, every page you just go in the root. And for case studies, I'm mapping it to, the base path will be case studies. And then I'm fixing, not even fixing, I'm adjusting things to be like, well, listen, there's no first name and last name, so let's not require family name. But I am nudging forward some properties. And actually, I just want to throw out, I'm turning off for this demo some relationships because they're not appropriate to Drupal CMS, so I felt like I didn't want them in the form. And I'm nudging entity references to make sure that when I create an event, I'm going to get a location with an entity reference. And a similar thing is going to happen with a project, that I'm going to get an entity reference. And what it's going to do is figure out that I want a client, an organization in this. It's a sponsor property. So let's see this in action. I'm going to run this last script. It's installing the migrate module, and it's running it. And it's just going through, frankly, just about 12 content types. I'm not migrating over the views. I'm going to go over to the ambitious site builder. You know what? I don't feel so bad about this. I know this trick. If it goes to it, we know the line of code. You just go in here, look. 582. By the way, I'm going to give myself some credit there. That's hilarious to be like, and just to throw it out there, that's been the bane of my existence for like 5 years of Drupal. If you don't get the right properties in there, it just dies. And you're like, God damn it. But okay. And so what happened here? Okay. What was the fail? I'm going to do something kind of crazy. I'm going to rerun this migration. I can salvage this if it doesn't work. Nah, it didn't pull the data in. Let's just see. Okay. I know the mistake. Boy, live demos are really hard. I missed one simple sequence. And I will catch, I'm not over time, right? I got a minute here. Okay, I'm restoring the backup, and I forgot to build the schema.org CMS recipe. Literally, that's why it's empty. That's why it's confused. There was a migration into empty information. So I'm just going to hit apply. And now it's building out all those content types that now the migration will work fine. I knew I was going to get caught by one of these. And we can skip launching the sandbox, and now we can rerun because we did it from a backup. Yep, it even went a little slower. And ddiv trush ULI. And now if I go to content, and I go to cream, that's fine. We can live with that error for the moment. What I want to show is what we're getting is so we get first and last names set up, and then we start to, I love this feature. So I'm taking that telephone number and email, and there is a telephone and email property on person, but I also implemented contact points using the custom field module. And contact points are amazing. It is a system to capture all the contact information about a person or organization. And you can go in and say, well, I want to get their home address and add that here. On the site I am working on, I did a migration into contact points, and we had 12 different email, phone, fax, office, lab, appointment fields with labels and customizations. And this becomes like a universal Swiss Army knife to get this information. It is a lifesaver. Going back, boy, when you get a demo, if you go over to case study right here, we get our nice little relationship that's happening to Drupal CMS, and then you can go over, and that's its own dedicated content type. So you get nice, clean, structured data. I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to slowly wrap this up to just say what's next. It is really important to see how the Drupal's recipe ecosystem evolves. There's Drupal 11 support for the module already, but because all those submodules are there, so you can install schema.org blueprints, 80–90% will work with Drupal 11, but there's a few contrib modules that still need to be upgraded to Drupal 11. For me, I really want to support object-oriented hooks in the code. It'll just make it easier to maintain. And ultimately, it's finalizing the code, and I'll share with you that this is all sponsored by my organization, and we haven't launched our site, so it ain't going to be stable till we launch our site. They need that flexibility, and it's that simple, but at the same time, there's a huge commitment to this moving forward. And at some point, we're going to start doing some recipes and sharing them with people in the community. Some key takeaways. Take a schema.org first approach to content modeling, period. I cannot emphasize that enough. It makes your life easier. You don't get into arguments over naming things. When people come in and suggest weird things, you're like, it doesn't align with any spec that's out there. It makes it so much easier to build a site. And then you should decide if and how you want to use the schema.org blueprints module. You might just use it for inspiration, and that's perfectly fine. And determine how you want to comply with the schema.org spec. And this is something I've learned, is some compliance is better than no compliance. I strongly recommend trying to get your content types to match with schema.org. Getting everyone on board to get every property to match and fill out that, sometimes it's filling out extra information. Like I ran into that where we're doing disease guides, and it was hard to be like, I know you have a symptoms page, but you have to, and it's a bunch of text, and I'm like, well, if you want good SEO, you're gonna have to write out each individual symptom in a list, and then it'll be in the underlying markup. That took a lot of energy. So really, improving compliance is an iterative process. I think you can launch I'm planning on launching a site and then gradually going through the fields and keep improving them. Maybe adding a schema, another schema.org property, cleaning up the data. And I strongly feel that most content architectures can achieve about 80 to 90% compliance. And my joke would be the remaining 10% is that marketing stuff that you just can't comply with. You just have to accept that it's there. I mean, even for the marketers, I haven't gone into it, but in the spec, they really do target marketers because they have an offers property. So if you're on a page and you're offering a service, you can say, here's the service we're offering. And then they have actions, the call to actions. What's the action you want someone to take on the page? That's all meant for marketers. When you're able to build a CTA that says, I want someone to register for an event on this page in this content. And just to help with recipes, I like recipes. They're really amazing. They're actually easy to build and maintain. I will probably never do a demo again without a recipe. It just makes a repeatable step. You can just run through it. Anytime you're like, well, I need these modules to do something, try using a recipe. I will warn people, right now it requires some understanding of configuration on how that works. Because you got to piece apart some configuration. I think that will be fixed in the future. The features module did fix that. Now it needs some version of that needs to fix it for recipes. Your own config actions are ridiculously easy to implement. I can't emphasize that enough, where you can take on an entity any method and expose it as a config action. And that's going down a rabbit hole, but they've thought those things out. And yeah, use it for repeatable starting points. And I didn't show any default content, but that's a really powerful API. So when you're doing a demo, you could have some default content. I did a CK editor demo, and I had default content for all the possible style guide for a CK editor. I'm going to end. How am I on time? Oh, I'm pretty good. Those are the slides. So you can pull that up, and then that has references to all the information. And you can ask questions, and I will repeat them. And thank you. Any questions or I'm going to stick around so you can ask them to me one-on-one or ping me.
When do you sleep?
That's a great question. Any other questions? All right, thank you guys. Enjoy the rest of the conference.